Today, we're going to talk about some verbs that will seem strange at first because they have features or act in ways you are not accustomed to from other verbs you have seen before. Stem-changing verbs and separable-prefix verbs. Just to make sure we're on solid footing, let's talk about a good old-fashioned regular verb before we start talking about some of the new ones. We'll use an old standby, spielen. Now, when we conjugate this verb, we simply remove the en from the infinitive form to get the verb stem. We'll add endings to this stem as usual. E for ich, st for du, etc. Now, as you'll notice, each conjugated form of spielen has that verb stem right in it, just with different letters added at the end. But now, let's look at a stem-changing verb and see if anything works differently. We'll start with the example of nehmen, which is a stem-changing verb that means to take. Now, since it's a stem-changing verb, when we conjugate it, we take off the en as usual, and we have the verb stem nehm. But think about what the name stem-changing verb must mean. When we conjugate this verb, the stem will change somewhere. It won't be exactly the same for all of the forms of the verb the way it was with spielen. In fact, the stem will change for the du form and for the rs form, but it will not change anywhere else. So, when we conjugate this verb, we end up with ich nehme, du nimmst, note the stem change here, es nimmt. Again, there's a stem change on that one, and it's changed in the exact same way. That's important, so keep an eye on that. Then, on the plural side, things are normal again. Wir nehmen, ihr nehmt, sie und sie nehmen. Again, building off of the original stem, not the changed stem. Notice that the stem change only happens for the du form and the rs form. This is true of all stem-changing verbs, so the next one we do will change there and only there as well. Also, notice that the change that happened to the du form is identical to the change in the rs form. The good news about stem-changing verbs is that they only have one weird stem change, not several. Also, notice that the endings you put on the verbs, e for ich, st for du, t for rs, etc., are completely normal. Let's do another example. And this time we'll use the verb sehen, which means to see. Again, remove the en to get the stem, which we now know will change in the du and rs forms. Specifically, when we conjugate sehen, we end up with ich sehe, du siehst, there's a stem change there, sie es sieht, again, the same changed stem as the du form, but with a different conjugation ending. And then on the plural side, completely normal. Wir sehen, ihr seht, sie sehen. Again, with this one, notice that the endings are normal, e, st, t, en, t, en, but that the stem has changed for the du form and the rs form. Furthermore, the stem has changed the same way in both of those changed forms. Here are some other common stem-changing verbs that you've either already encountered or will be encountering soon. Essen becomes du isst or rs isst. Fahren changes to du fährst or rs fährt. Gefallen would become du gefällst, rs gefällt. Laufen becomes du läufst, rs läuft, with an umlaut, and notice the pronunciation change. Nehmen becomes du nimmst, or rs nimmt. Sehen becomes du siehst, or rs sieht, as we just saw. and aussehen becomes du siehst aus, and sie es sieht aus. A couple comments here. Notice that many of the stem changes actually involve only the addition of an umlaut. It may seem like a very minor change, but be careful of it, since it changes the pronunciation of the word. Läuft, not lauft. Gefällt, not gefällt. Fährt, not fahrt. Also, unfortunately, there are no rules or easy patterns that will help you know which verbs out there are stem-changing ones, or what their stems will change to. So the bad news is that you need to memorize the stem changes along with the infinitives. The good news, though, is that if you know both the infinitive and the changed stem, those two pieces of information will allow you to figure out the forms of the verb in all of their various conjugation forms. Finally, you'll notice that the last verb on this list, aussehen, has an extra word attached to it when it's conjugated. This is a very strange verb indeed, because it's both a stem-changing verb and a separable-prefix verb. So that's a good segue to now discussing verbs with separable prefixes. Separable-prefix verbs are just like the name suggests. They have a prefix attached to the beginning of their infinitive forms, but this prefix is then separated from the stem when the verb is conjugated. The separable prefix will go to the end of its sentence or clause, not right after the verb, at the end of the sentence or clause. Here's how this works. Let's use the example of anprobieren, which means to try on. First of all, an is a separable prefix, so that will be removed from the stem probieren when we put this into sentences. For instance, we could say, ich probiere die graue Jacke an. I try on the gray jacket. Sandra probiert die schwarze Hose an. Sandra is trying the black pants on. Probierst du den blauen Rock oder die Jeans an? And notice, no matter how long the sentence gets, an is always at the end. However, probieren has been conjugated and is in its normal position. Now let's look at another one, anziehen, which means to put on or also to wear. Again, an is a separable prefix, so it will come off and go last in the sentences in which we use this verb. The stem ziehen will be conjugated normally and go in standard verb position, as in these examples. Was ziehst du zu Sonjas Fete an? Ich ziehe meinen neuen weißen Jogginganzug zur Fete an. Martin zieht einen schönen Pullover an. Again, note the position of the separable prefix at the end of each sentence, not next to its verb, all the way at the end. Now let's look at another separable verb that you'll need to use a lot, aussehen. As you know, aussehen is both a separable verb, in other words, aus will go at the end of the sentence, and it's a stem-changing verb as well. So we'll have a lot to watch out for when we start using this verb. So consider these examples. Martin sieht heute wirklich schick aus. Meine alte braune Hose sieht nicht so toll aus. Meine Schuhe sehen scheußlich aus. Du siehst heute sehr fesch aus. As with anziehen and anprobieren, note that the separable prefix aus has moved to the end of each sentence. But also, notice that the stem change of sehen to siehst has occurred in the sentences where we're using the du form or sie es form, in which case it'll go to sieht. One more comment here. Many learners of German start mixing up anziehen with aussehen. And the reason is probably that they look very similar when used in context. Compare Martin zieht to Martin sieht in those two sentences. It may only be one letter different in spelling, but the difference in meaning is pretty big. Martin wears a sweater, he doesn't look a sweater. And he doesn't wear stylish, he looks stylish. If the S and the Z are tripping you up, you also have the prefix to go on. An from anziehen and aus from aussehen. Okay, it's time now to review the essentials of some of the stranger verbs you will have encountered so far. Stem-changing verbs only change their stems in the du form and sie es form, and the stem changes to the same thing both times. Unfortunately for you, stem-changing verbs are unpredictable, so you'll need to memorize the stem changers with both their infinitive forms and the changed stem. Separable-prefix verbs have a prefix at the beginning of their infinitive forms that will be removed and put at the end of the sentence or clause that contains that verb.